Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, Take a Look Inside, where we're going to talk about conflicts and take a look inside the people who have lived it. So, here I have with me one of my guests. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Gerta from Egypt.
Hello. So now we're just gonna jump right into the questions. So, my first question for you is, how did you feel during the revolution itself?
All right. At that time, my children were very young, and the environment and the atmosphere felt very unsafe because of the lack of food and supplies, especially the first 2 weeks. So, yes, and I fled the country. I left. I
Mm-hmm.
returned back a month and a half after the president already resigned.
Okay. And another question, do you think that the Egyptians they started to rely more on social media and technology since that whole ordeal?
I believe they started earlier and they actually made a very good use of the social media and these networks to make everybody be aware of what was going on, of the unpleasant situation everyone was having at that time, and to organize them to get up one day and say no to everything.
Hmm. And obviously you said you weren't really in the country during uh the time where the protests were happening and all that. But from an outsider's point of view, uh do you think that what the Egyptians were doing, it was a positive thing and it was a good thing to push the protests for how long they were going on and so on?
Well, that's a very good question. I was here the first week of protesting when everything went out of hand, when the police went off the streets and the army did not deploy yet in protection of the civilians. So chaos was instead, and looting and stealing and everything. So, yes, for the first time after so many years in Egypt, I've always perceived it as a very safe country. The first time I felt unsafe, not only for myself, but for my whole family and people I loved. So that's why I left. And I believe I was talking every day to my husband back home and to his cousins. And I got to know that everyone felt the same, unsafe. So at the same time, it was a needed step because the population was suffering, Egypt was not doing well, etc., etc. So yes, maybe the way that was chosen to do it was not the right way. Maybe it had to take more time until forces, political forces, they take over, etc. But that's for the history to prove and to analyze.
Hmm. And in regards to the Western coverage of the revolution, do you think that they were able to cover it properly and report what actually happened, or do you think that the things that they were saying was sugar-coated?
Um, Looking at it now and thinking about it now, I believe media took sides, some against and some supporting it. The reality was not given in a proper way because I remember seeing CNN and BBC giving shots and reports and coverage of scandals during the protesting rather than the objectives of the protesters.
Hmm.
And the spirit actually of protesters was very high. After I returned back and the president was already off, they were still protesting, but they were singing, um, saying poetry, patriotic songs. It was this very high spirit within the crowds. Yet, international media was giving the worst face of it, like how the journalists were being harassed, how girls were being harassed within the protesting. So, no, the coverage was not real, was not giving the reality, but it wasn't sugarcoated either. It was giving the worst of it.
Hmm.
The protesting was much nicer than that.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think that social media was more relied on during the revolution itself, or do you think it was more the word of the mouth that got the information around and the protests to happen?
It was the social media and the lack of it because they made a mistake. The president and I don't know, the governments made a very big mistake by cutting off the internet connection
Mm-hmm.
and mobile networks to the whole country the next day of the protesting, of the big protest. That angered people because they couldn't communicate with each other, and the only efficient way and the quickest was through social media. It angered people, it made them go down in masses
Mm-hmm.
until the networks are back. And yes, later on, all the social media networks were used to organize more protesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That is actually almost all the question. We have one more.
Sure.
Another one is, do you think that after the revolution was over and you came back to Egypt and so on, do you think that how it went about, do you think it changed the way you view Egyptians?
In a way, yes, because I did not see that layer of the society that could harm the people next to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they did come out. They were not being obvious and they were not being seen, maybe because of the system was very tough and rough on them. But once the democracy came on, they did come out because they misunderstand the democracy with freedom of doing everything they wish. So, yes, the society has changed. I believe in years and as time passes, the values will resurface again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that is actually all I have for you today. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for
You're most
giving me your
welcome.
time. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with other guests. And thank you for listening.